June Holloway's hands didn't tremble when the Mafia boss's fiancé smiled at her with that venomous and calculated expression. That should have been the first warning sign that this night would completely transform her life. Ordinary people froze in the presence of Mona Lisa Sterling. Experienced criminals looked away when she passed by, their eyes finding sudden interest in the floor or walls. Robust men, twice June's size, with scars that told stories of violence and survival, had already left the Crimson Pearl restaurant crying after one of Mona Lisa's devastating performances. But June simply stood there, notepad in hand, watching that stunning and dangerous woman decide exactly how she would destroy her. And what happened that night in the heart of Salem, Oregon, would change everything forever, in ways that neither of them could possibly imagine. Hello, I'm Rachel Ashwood, and this is another story from our series. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel so this story can reach more people. Leave your like, share, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you love intense and engaging adult stories, don't forget to check out the Dangerous Obsession ebook collection, available in the first pinned comment. This is a narration of fictional content, created exclusively for entertainment. Now let's continue with June's story. The Crimson Pearl restaurant, located in the heart of Salem, Oregon, was known as the meeting point for the local elite and less respectable figures. The port city, with its foggy streets and mysterious atmosphere, harbored secrets that few dared to uncover. The old docks exhaled the smell of salt and danger, while the Victorian mansions on the hills watched everything with their dark windows like vigilant eyes. Salem wasn't one of those cities that appeared in tourist brochures or travel magazines. It was a working city, a city where deals were made in shadowy corners, where money changed hands without questions, where the line between legitimate business and criminal enterprise blurred until it disappeared entirely. "Tell me something," Mona Lisa spoke, her voice sweet as honey and sharp as a razor blade cutting through silk. "Do you think you're special?" The question hung in the air like toxic smoke, spreading slowly through the restaurant and poisoning the atmosphere. Around them, the Crimson Pearl had plunged into absolute and suffocating silence. The other waitresses had dissolved into the shadows of the restaurant's dark corners, making themselves as invisible as possible. The kitchen staff peeked through the service window, their faces pale as paper, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. Even the pianist's fingers floated motionless over the keys, frozen in the middle of a melody, the notes dying in the air unfinished, because everyone who worked at the Crimson Pearl knew exactly what would come next. They had witnessed it before, had seen the pattern repeat itself with sickening regularity. Mona Lisa would ask her questions, sweet and poisonous, and then she would tear her victim apart piece by piece until they begged for a mercy that would never come. The ritual was always the same, meticulous and cruel. Psychological destruction was her favorite art, and she practiced it with the precision of a surgeon and the enthusiasm of a sadist. She enjoyed watching people break, enjoyed the moment when their dignity crumbled, and they realized they were completely powerless against her. June had been working there for only 3 weeks, but in that short time she had already heard the stories that circulated through the staff, like ghost tales told around a campfire. Stories about the waitress who had brought the wrong appetizer and ended up blacklisted from every restaurant in Oregon, unable to find work anywhere in the service industry. About the busboy who had accidentally bumped into Mona Lisa's chair and ended up hospitalized with both arms broken in multiple places and several fractured ribs, requiring surgery and months of physical therapy. About the manager who tried to defend his staff and lost his restaurant, his life savings accumulated over decades of hard work, and his family in the span of just one devastating month. The stories circulated like urban legends, each more terrifying than the last, each serving as a warning about what happened when you crossed Mona Lisa Sterling. But what June didn't know yet was that this night would be different from all the others. This night would be the beginning of something that would change not just her life, but the entire criminal landscape of Salem. Mona Lisa Sterling was engaged to Alex Kane, the man who controlled Salem's ports, union contracts, underground gambling operations, and half the legitimate businesses throughout the state of Oregon. His name appeared in whispered conversations and coded messages. His influence reached police departments, city halls, and boardrooms across the West Coast. He was the ghost that haunted every corner of the city, the invisible king of an empire built on secrets, and purchased loyalties. Politicians sought his favor, judges bent to his will, and business owners paid him tribute disguised as consulting fees and protection payments. But Alex operated from the shadows, invisible and omnipresent, like a puppet master controlling strings that stretched throughout the city and beyond. Mona Lisa ruled in the light of day. She was his public face, his demonstration of power, his warning to anyone who thought about stepping out of line. And she loved every second of it. Power intoxicated her like the most addictive drug, filling her veins with a rush that nothing else could match. She had grown up poor on the streets of Portland, sleeping in shelters and wearing donated clothes, and now she used her beauty and cruelty as weapons to ensure she would never return to that life. Every humiliation she inflicted, every person she destroyed, was a reminder to herself that she had climbed out of poverty and would do anything to stay out. "I asked you a question," Mona Lisa continued, still wearing that frozen smile that never reached her eyes. "Do you think you're special? Better than everyone else here? Because the way you're looking at me now, with that calm and controlled expression, suggests you don't understand your position in this hierarchy." Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath, sharp and ready to cut. She leaned forward slightly, her expensive perfume wafting across the table, a scent that probably cost more than June's monthly rent. June met her eyes directly, refusing to look away. They were cold and calculating, meticulously cruel in their assessment. The eyes of someone who had never faced real consequences in their entire privileged life. The eyes of someone who felt genuine pleasure in causing pain to others, who fed on fear like a vampire feeding on blood. June recognized that look because she had seen it before, in corporate laboratories where executives destroyed careers for fun, where people's livelihoods were treated as pieces in a game. "I don't think I'm special," June said calmly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I think I'm doing my job to the best of my ability, which is all anyone can ask of me." "Your job?" Mona Lisa laughed, the sound like shattering glass, sharp and dangerous. "Your job is to serve me, to anticipate my needs before I even express them, to ensure that everything is absolutely perfect and impeccable. And yet you brought me the wrong vintage." She gestured dramatically at the wine bottle, her diamond bracelet catching the light and throwing sparkles across the white tablecloth. June looked at the bottle still resting in the silver ice bucket beside the table, condensation dripping down its sides. The label clearly indicated 2017 Bordeaux, exactly what Mona Lisa had ordered with that imperious voice that expected immediate obedience. June had checked twice before opening the bottle, had examined it a third time before serving, had even asked the sommelier to verify it. She knew this game perfectly. She had worked in corporate research long enough to recognize manipulation when she saw it, to understand when someone was setting up a scene for their own purposes. Mona Lisa was setting up a scene, creating a performance for everyone in the restaurant to witness. The question was, why? What was the real purpose of this public demonstration of power? Why tonight? Why June? June felt a chill run down her spine when she realized something bigger was happening here, something she couldn't quite see yet, but could sense like an approaching storm. Then June noticed the man sitting alone in the farthest corner of the restaurant, partially hidden by shadows and the strategic placement of a large potted plant. He had been there when she started her shift, sitting in the shadows, reading something on his phone, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. She had barely registered his presence because he seemed to want to be invisible, blending with the darkness like a predator waiting in ambush. But now his attention was completely focused on their confrontation, his phone forgotten on the table. His dark eyes watched with an intensity that made the air feel heavy and dense, charged with electricity. There was something predatory in that gaze, like a lion observing its prey, calculating distances and angles. This was Alex Kane. And suddenly, June understood everything with perfect clarity. This wasn't about wine. This was about power, about dominance, about establishing hierarchy. It was Mona Lisa proving to her fiancé, to the staff, to everyone watching, that she could crush anyone she wanted, that she was untouchable, that she ruled this domain with absolute authority. This was a calculated demonstration, and June was just the prop chosen for that night, the sacrificial lamb brought to the altar. But why her? Why now? The answer would come in a way June could never imagine. in ways that would change the trajectory of multiple lives. "Ma'am, that bottle is the 2017 vintage you ordered," June said, keeping her voice level and professional, refusing to let fear creep into her tone. "You can see the label clearly from where you're sitting. But if you'd prefer something different, I'll be happy to bring another selection from our cellar. We have an excellent 2015 if you'd prefer something more mature, or a 2018 if you'd like something younger and more vibrant." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees instantly, as if someone had opened a door to winter. Mona Lisa's smile disappeared as if it had never existed, wiped away like chalk from a blackboard. She stood slowly, deliberately, her chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound like nails scratching a chalkboard, setting everyone's teeth on edge. She was tall and elegant in a black dress that probably cost more than June made in an entire year, maybe 2 years. The fabric moved like liquid shadow, custom tailored to her body. Her jewelry caught the light from the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead, diamonds and platinum, markers of wealth and undeniable status. Every movement was calculated to intimidate, to remind everyone present of the vast gulf between her position and theirs. "Are you calling me a liar?" The words came out soft and deadly, each syllable precisely enunciated, dripping with venom. June felt every gaze in the restaurant burning into her back like physical pressure. She knew what the smart move was, what the survival move was. Apologize profusely. Grovel on her knees if necessary. Beg for forgiveness with tears in her eyes. Accept whatever punishment Mona Lisa decided to inflict, and consider herself lucky if she only lost her job. That was the script, the expected response, the way this scene was supposed to play out. Everyone knew their roles in this theater of cruelty, but June was exhausted, tired of struggling to pay rent after losing her position as a researcher at a pharmaceutical company that had closed its doors after a corruption scandal that made national news. Tired of being invisible and insignificant, just another face in the crowd, another person whose life didn't matter to anyone. Tired of watching people like Mona Lisa destroy others for pure entertainment, while everyone simply looked away, pretending not to see, protecting themselves through willful blindness. Tired of the constant fear that had become her companion, the anxiety that woke her up at 3 a.m, the feeling of drowning slowly in a life that seemed to offer no way out. Most of all, she was tired of being afraid. Afraid to live, afraid to breathe, afraid to exist, afraid to take up space in the world. She had spent the last 6 months becoming a shadow of herself, shrinking smaller and smaller, trying to disappear. And in that moment, something inside her simply refused to break. Some core of steel that she didn't know she possessed suddenly asserted itself. "I'm not calling you anything," June said clearly, each word measured and deliberate, her voice carrying across the silent restaurant. "I'm stating a verifiable fact that anyone can confirm. The bottle is 2017. Your order was 2017. If there's a problem with the wine itself, with the taste or quality or temperature, I'll gladly replace it immediately. But the vintage is correct, and that's simply a fact, not an opinion or a judgment. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Time seemed to freeze, the entire restaurant suspended in amber. The pianist had stopped completely, his hands suspended in the air above the keys. The other restaurant patrons watched with a mixture of horror and fascination, like spectators at a car accident, unable to look away from the impending disaster. Some of them had their phones out, ready to record whatever happened next, ready to capture the moment when this foolish waitress was destroyed, and then the world exploded into violence and chaos. Mona Lisa grabbed the wine glass with a sudden, vicious movement and hurled it with all her strength. The glass flew past June's head by mere inches, so close that June felt the wind of its passage, and shattered against the marble floor behind her with an explosive crash. Red wine exploded across the white stone like arterial blood at a crime scene, spreading in a dark stain that looked almost black in the dim light. Crystal fragments scattered in all directions, glittering under the chandeliers like small, deadly diamonds, like shrapnel from a bomb. The sound of breaking echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot, making several patrons jump in their seats. June didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She simply stood there, rooted to the spot, looking at Mona Lisa with an expression that wasn't exactly pity, but came close to it. It was the look you might give a child throwing a tantrum, a look of mild disappointment mixed with understanding. And that, more than anything else, seemed to enrage the other woman in a visceral way, touching something deep and raw inside her. It was as if June had just ripped off the mask Mona Lisa wore, revealing the insecure and desperate creature beneath, the girl from the Portland streets who was still terrified of going back to poverty. "You arrogant little—" Mona Lisa advanced, her hand raised to strike, fingers curved like claws, her face twisted with rage. Her carefully maintained composure had shattered like the wine glass, revealing the violence beneath. "Enough." The voice came from the farthest corner, deep and absolute, carrying a weight of authority that stopped everyone in their tracks. Alex Kane stood up, and the entire restaurant seemed to tilt in his direction, as if gravity itself had shifted. He moved with the controlled grace of a predator, crossing the floor in smooth, measured steps that made no sound. His suit was perfectly tailored, dark and expensive, probably Italian and custom-made. His face was hard angles and sharp edges, the kind of face that revealed absolutely nothing, that had been trained over years to show no emotion. But his eyes were intelligent and calculating, missing no detail, taking in the entire scene and understanding it instantly. He was 36 years old, but carried the presence of someone who had lived several lifetimes, who had seen and done things that aged the soul, even if the body remained young. Mona Lisa's expression transformed instantly, like an actress switching roles. The rage melted away, as if it had never existed, replaced by sweetness and concern, her voice becoming soft and melodious. "Alex, darling, this waitress has been incredibly disrespectful to me. She practically called me a liar in front of everyone, humiliated me publicly. I was just trying to enjoy a quiet dinner and the bottle is 2017. Alex's words cut through her explanation like a knife through butter, sharp and final. "You ordered it yourself 25 minutes ago. I heard you place the order. I was sitting right there." He gestured toward his corner table, his movement economical and precise. The color drained from Mona Lisa's face like water from a sink, then rushed back in a wave of red that started at her neck and spread upward. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, searching for words that wouldn't come, like a fish gasping for air. Being contradicted by the staff was embarrassing. Being contradicted by her fiancé in front of witnesses was absolutely humiliating, a public demonstration that her power had limits, that there was someone above her in the hierarchy. It was a break in the carefully constructed facade she had built, a crack in the armor she wore, but what would come next would be even more devastating, would shake the foundations of everything she thought she knew. "I must have been confused," Mona Lisa managed to say, her voice tight as a wire about to snap, each word forced out through clenched teeth. "I'm not feeling well. I should go home immediately." She grabbed her designer purse, a Hermes bag that cost more than most people's cars, and shot one last venomous look at June. A look that promised retribution, that said this wasn't over. Her shoulder collided deliberately with June as she passed, hard enough to make June stumble and nearly lose her balance. The door slammed behind her with enough force to make the glasses at the bar tremble and the chandelier crystals tinkle. Slowly, like a held breath being released, the restaurant came back to life. Conversations resumed in hushed whispers, people leaning toward each other to discuss what they had just witnessed. The pianist tentatively began playing again, a soft melody that tried to restore normalcy. Waiters moved again, though they gave June a wide berth, as if she were contaminated with something dangerous. Alex was still standing there, his eyes fixed on June with an intensity that made her skin tingle, made her feel exposed and vulnerable. There was something in his gaze that she couldn't quite read, something that wasn't anger but wasn't quite approval either. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, each word deliberate. "June Holloway, sir. You're new here. 3 weeks. It wasn't a question." He knew. He always knew everything that happened in his territory, had sources of information that extended into every corner of Salem. "Yes, sir. You're not afraid of consequences." Again, a statement, not a question, an observation delivered with certainty. "I'm terrified of consequences," June corrected, meeting his eyes directly, refusing to look away, despite every instinct telling her to lower her gaze. "But I'm more afraid of what happens to me, if I let fear make all my decisions. I'm afraid of becoming someone I don't recognize in the mirror anymore. Someone who bends and breaks every time someone powerful tells me to." Something shifted in his expression. A tiny crack in the impenetrable armor he wore. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying her with new interest, as if seeing her for the first time. "Interesting answer," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Then he walked back to his table, with those same measured steps, picked up his phone, and made a call. June could see his lips moving, but couldn't hear the words over the resumed noise of the restaurant. Whatever he was saying seemed important, his expression serious and focused. June finished her shift in a fog of adrenaline and dread, her hands shaking slightly whenever she picked up a tray. The other waitresses avoided her like she was contaminated with a fatal disease, refusing to make eye contact, giving her wide berth in the narrow service corridors. The manager, a nervous man named Robert who had worked at the Crimson Pearl for 15 years, pulled her aside with trembling hands and told her in a wavering voice that she would need to find other employment. Nobody survived crossing paths with Mona Lisa Sterling. It was an unwritten law of Salem, a rule that everyone understood. You didn't challenge the king's bride. You didn't embarrass her publicly. You didn't make her look foolish. The consequences were always severe, always final. June walked home through the cold November night, her coat pulled tight against the cutting wind that came from the ocean, carrying the smell of salt and fish and decay. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago, with crumbling brick and windows that didn't quite close properly. The heating barely worked, clanking and hissing but producing little warmth. The wiring was dangerous, sparking occasionally, and there were moisture stains on the walls that bloomed like dark flowers. But it was hers, at least until the end of the month when her savings would run out completely and she'd be facing eviction. She had lost her job as an investigative researcher 3 months ago, when her pharmaceutical company was shut down after revelations of illegal testing that made national news. Executives being led away in handcuffs, careers destroyed overnight. She had spent 2 months burning through her savings, sending out resumes that never received responses, watching her bank account dwindle with terrifying speed. The waitressing job at the Crimson Pearl had been a lifeline, a rope thrown to a drowning person. Minimum wage plus tips, just enough to survive a few more weeks, to keep the lights on and food in the refrigerator. Now that was gone too, snatched away in a moment of defiance that felt both liberating and terrifying. June climbed the stairs to her apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last, her legs leaden with exhaustion and stress. She was reaching for her keys, fumbling in her purse, when the black car pulled up to the curb below. It was sleek and expensive, a Mercedes or BMW, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in this neighborhood of pawn shops and check-cashing stores. The rear window rolled down smoothly, and Alex Kane looked out at her from the shadows of the interior, his face partially illuminated by the streetlight. "June Holloway," he said, his voice echoing in the empty street, bouncing off the buildings. "Get in. We need to talk." Every instinct screamed at her to run, to sprint up the stairs and lock herself in her apartment and never come out. This was how people disappeared in Salem, how bodies ended up in the river or buried in the woods. But June also knew that running was pointless, would only delay the inevitable. If Alex Kane wanted to find her, he would. He controlled every corner, every street, every shadow of this city. There was nowhere to hide from a man like him, no place beyond his reach. She got in the car, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne, masculine and subtle. Alex sat across from her in the spacious back seat, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert, watching her every movement. The driver pulled away from the curb smoothly, the engine barely audible, gliding through the streets like a ghost. City lights passed by the darkened windows, creating hypnotic patterns of light and shadow that played across Alex's face. "Where are we going?" June asked, her voice steadier than she expected, though her hands were clenched in her lap. "Nowhere specific. I wanted to have a conversation without an audience, without everyone watching and listening and reporting back." Alex studied her in the dim light, his gaze intense and penetrating. "You surprised me tonight. That doesn't happen often. Is that why you're here? To punish me for embarrassing your fiancé?" June asked directly, seeing no point in feigning ignorance or playing games. If he was going to hurt her, dancing around the subject wouldn't change that. "If I wanted to punish you, we wouldn't be having this conversation," Alex said, his voice matter of fact. You'd simply disappear, and no one would ask questions. That's how things work in my world. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. Tell me something. What did you do before you started working as a waitress? You don't carry yourself like someone who spent their life in service. I was an investigative researcher for Meridian Pharmaceuticals. I analyzed data, tracked patterns, looked for inconsistencies in test results. They laid off half the department in August when the scandal came to light. When federal investigators showed up with warrants, June saw no reason to lie, no advantage in deception. He probably already knew her entire history anyway. Investigative research? He nodded slowly, processing this information. That explains some things about your behavior tonight. You have that look, the one people develop when they're trained to see patterns and ask difficult questions, when they're taught not to accept things at face value. What do you want from me, Mr. Kane? June asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. I want to offer you a job. I need a personal assistant, someone intelligent and observant, capable of thinking clearly under pressure. His eyes held hers, unblinking. Someone who isn't easily intimidated, who won't fall apart when things get difficult. Someone who will tell me the truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's not what I want to hear. June felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet, as if she were falling through space. You don't know anything about me beyond what happened tonight. I know you stood up to Mona Lisa when everyone else was too terrified to breathe, when seasoned criminals were looking at their shoes. I know you didn't try to save yourself by blaming someone else or making excuses. I know you're educated, experienced in research and analysis, and currently desperate for employment. He paused, letting that sink in. I know enough to make this offer. June's mind raced, trying to process what was happening, trying to see the trap that must be hidden somewhere. The offer was impossible, insane, dangerous beyond measure. Alex Kane was a criminal. Everyone knew that, even if it had never been proven in court. Working for him would mean entering a world of violence and corruption, would mean crossing lines she never imagined crossing, would mean becoming complicit in things she didn't want to think about. But it would also mean security, money, a chance to stop drowning. It would mean not being evicted, not going hungry, not lying awake at night calculating how many more days she could survive. What exactly would I be doing? She asked carefully, choosing each word. Managing my schedule, reviewing contracts, handling correspondence, coordinating meetings with various business associates. I have legitimate business interests, quite extensive ones actually. Real estate, shipping and logistics, consulting services. You would help manage those operations, keep everything organized and running smoothly. He smiled thinly, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. Everything would be above board, at least as far as your involvement is concerned. And the salary? June asked, knowing that money would be the hook, the bait that would make this trap irresistible. $200,000 a year to start, with performance bonuses that could add another $50,000. Full health insurance, dental, vision, retirement benefits, 4 weeks paid vacation. Alex listed the benefits as if reading from a script, his voice neutral. $200,000. June made $18,000 at the Crimson Pearl. Barely enough to survive. This was more money than she had ever imagined making. More than her parents had earned combined in their best years. This was security, stability, a future that didn't involve constant fear and desperation. This was also a deal with the devil, a Faustian bargain that would cost her soul. Why me? She asked again, needing to understand, needing to see the shape of the trap. Of all the people in Salem, all the qualified candidates you could hire, why choose me? Because everyone else is afraid of me, Alex said simply, with brutal honesty. They tell me what they think I want to hear. Filter information to make themselves look good, hide problems until they become disasters. You don't do that. When you looked at Mona Lisa tonight, you saw someone trying to control you through fear, and you refused to play along. That's rare. That's valuable to someone in my position. He leaned back, his face falling into shadow, and frankly, I need someone around me who isn't constantly calculating how to use me or betray me. Someone whose loyalty I can trust. The car had circled back and stopped in front of June's building. Alex pulled a business card from his jacket and held it out. It was expensive stock, heavy and textured, with nothing printed except a phone number and elegant script. "Think about it carefully," he said. "You have until tomorrow evening at 6. Call that number with your answer." June took the card, feeling its weight in her hand, the quality of the paper. "What if I say no? Then you say no. You go back to your life and we never speak again. I'll make sure Mona Lisa leaves you alone." His eyes held hers, and she saw something in them she couldn't quite identify. "But I don't think you will refuse." "Why not?" "Because you're drowning, June Holloway, and I'm offering you a lifeline. The question isn't whether you'll take it. The question is whether you're brave enough to grab on even though you don't know where it leads, even though you know it comes with a price." June got out and stood on the cracked sidewalk, watching the black vehicle disappear into the night, its taillights fading like dying embers. She looked down at the business card, at the simple phone number that represented a choice between safety and danger, poverty and financial security, the person she was and the person she might become. She went upstairs, made tea with shaking hands, and sat by the window watching the city lights, the distant glow of downtown Salem, the darkness of the river beyond. When morning came with gray light filtering through dirty windows, she already knew her answer. She had known it from the moment she got in the car, maybe even from the moment she stood up to Mona Lisa. She called the number at exactly 6 o'clock the next evening, her finger hovering over the button for a long moment before she pressed it. "I'll take the job," she said when Alex answered, her voice firm despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Good. Start Monday, 9 a.m. The address is 525 Harbor Avenue, 42nd floor. Don't be late." He hung up before she could respond, leaving her holding the phone in silence. Monday morning arrived wrapped in cold rain and gray clouds that pressed down on the city like a weight. June dressed carefully, choosing a simple but professional suit she had bought at a thrift store, black and conservative. She took the bus downtown, watching the city transform from her neighborhood of pawnshops and liquor stores to the gleaming towers of the business district. She stood outside 525 Harbor Avenue, looking up at the gleaming tower that disappeared into the low clouds, all glass and steel and money. This was the point of no return, the moment when she could still walk away. She went inside, through revolving doors into a lobby of marble and chrome. The 42nd floor was elegant and understated, designed to impress without being vulgar. Hardwood floors polished to a mirror shine, modern art on the walls that probably cost more than houses, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city and ocean stretching to the horizon. A receptionist, perfectly groomed and professional, directed her to Alex's office with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He was already there, standing by the windows, talking on his phone in a language June didn't recognize, possibly Russian or Polish. He gestured for her to enter, finished his conversation with a few sharp words, and ended the call. "You're early," he said, checking his watch. "That's good. I value punctuality above almost everything else. I value employment," June replied, allowing herself a small smile. That almost smile flickered across his face, breaking through his serious expression for just a moment. "Fair enough. Let's begin." The first week was surprisingly normal, almost disappointingly mundane. June managed Alex's schedule, which was complex and demanding, filled with meetings and calls. She reviewed contracts, dense legal documents that required careful attention. She coordinated with lawyers and accountants, professional people in expensive suits. Everything seemed legitimate, legal, exactly what Alex had promised. She began to relax gradually, the tension in her shoulders easing. Maybe this really was just a job. Maybe she had misjudged the situation, let her imagination run wild. Then she met Victor Crane, and everything changed. Victor was Alex's right-hand man, his head of security and operations. He was tall and powerfully built, with cold blue eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them, and a scar running down his left cheek like a lightning bolt. He looked at June with absolute indifference, as if she were a piece of furniture, something beneath his notice. "Victor handles anything sensitive," Alex explained during the brief introduction. "If there's ever a security concern, anything unusual, you go through him first." June nodded politely, but something prickled at the back of her neck, an instinctive warning. There was something about Victor, something controlled and dangerous, that made her deeply uneasy. She had learned to trust her instincts during her years as a researcher, had learned that the feeling of wrongness usually meant something was actually wrong. On Friday afternoon of her second week, Mona Lisa walked into the office without knocking, without announcement. June was alone, reviewing a complex acquisition contract. She looked up as the door opened and her body went cold, adrenaline flooding her system. Mona Lisa stood in the doorway, wearing white, pristine and perfect as fresh snow, like armor made of light. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood, predatory and cruel. "Hello, June," she said, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a trap snapping shut. "We need to have a little talk. Just the two of us." June set down her pen carefully, her hand steady despite the fear. "Can I help you with something, Miss Sterling?" "Miss Sterling." Mona Lisa laughed, the sound brittle and cold. "So formal, so professional. But we both know this isn't about professionalism, don't we?" She walked around the desk slowly, deliberately invading June's space, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Her perfume was overwhelming, expensive and cloying. "I've been watching you very carefully," Mona Lisa continued, perching on the edge of June's desk, too close, violating boundaries. "The way Alex looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. The way he actually listens when you speak, as if your words have weight. The way his meetings run longer when you're involved, as if he wants you there." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more threatening than a shout. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? I see a threat. A pretty little nobody who thinks she can insert herself into something she doesn't understand. Something that was built long before you arrived." Mona Lisa's eyes gleamed with malice, with a hatred that seemed disproportionate. "Alex and I are building an empire together. We're partners in everything, in business and in life. And then you come along with your innocent eyes and your moral superiority, and suddenly he's questioning things, doubting, changing." June stood up, maintaining eye contact, refusing to be intimidated despite the fear coursing through her. "I'm his assistant. I'm here to do a job, nothing more. Whatever relationship you have with Alex is none of my business, and doesn't concern me. Everything about Alex is my business. That's what it means to be his partner, his future wife." Mona Lisa also stood, forcing June to step back until she was pressed against the bookshelf. "But you're smart. So let me make this very clear. Crystal clear, so there's no misunderstanding. You're here because Alex finds you amusing temporarily. But amusement fades, novelty wears off, and when it does, I'll still be here. And I have a very long memory, and I never forget a slight." She walked to the door, then paused dramatically, her hand on the handle. "One more thing. Standing up to me in a restaurant full of witnesses is one thing. But if you ever truly get in my way, if you ever become a real problem, you'll learn what real consequences look like. What happens to people who cross me." Her smile was ice and venom, beautiful and deadly. "Ask around. Ask what happens to people who cross Mona Lisa Sterling. The stories are quite educational, quite specific." She left, and June sank back into her chair, her hands finally starting to shake uncontrollably. Delayed reaction setting in. She had walked into the center of something dangerous, something much bigger than she had realized. And she was beginning to understand that the real threat wasn't Alex. It was the woman who stood beside him, the woman who saw her as competition, as a threat to her position. But what June didn't know yet was that Mona Lisa had her own secrets, her own agenda. And those secrets were about to explode in a way that would change everything, would tear apart the careful structure that had been built over years. Over the following weeks, June fell into a rhythm despite the constant undercurrent of danger. She worked long hours, often staying late into the evening when the office was empty and quiet. She learned the intricate web of Alex's business operations, how everything connected, how money flowed through various companies and accounts, and she spent time with Alex himself, more time than she had expected. He kept her close, brought her into meetings with important people, asked for her analysis of situations, valued her opinion in ways that surprised her. He was brilliant, June realized gradually. Every decision was carefully measured and weighed. Every risk was meticulously assessed from multiple angles. He controlled his world with the precision of a chess master, always thinking several moves ahead. But there were cracks in the facade, moments when the mask slipped. Sometimes late at night when they were reviewing contracts or preparing for acquisitions, Alex would pause and stare out the window at the city lights, at the sprawl of Salem below them. His expression would shift, becoming something almost vulnerable, almost human. In those moments, June saw someone trapped by his own power, someone who had made choices he couldn't undo, someone who carried the weight of an empire built on questionable foundations. She saw a man who was tired, who wanted something different but didn't know how to get it. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one night, the question escaping before she could stop it. They were alone in his office well past midnight, preparing for a major acquisition, the city dark and quiet below them. Alex looked at her, genuinely surprised by the question, his guard dropping for a moment. "Regret what? This life, the choices that brought you here, that made you who you are?" For a long moment, he didn't answer, just stared out at the city. Then he turned to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "Every day," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "But regret doesn't change anything, doesn't undo the past. You are who you are. You've made the choices you've made, and you live with the consequences. Carry them with you no matter how heavy they become." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her, the most human, the most vulnerable. June wanted to say something, to offer comfort or understanding, but Alex's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He glanced at the screen, and his expression went cold again, the walls slamming back into place. "It's late," he said formally, his voice businesslike again. "You should go home and get some rest." The moment was over, the vulnerability hidden again, but something had shifted between them. Something subtle but undeniable. A connection had formed, fragile but real. And June knew that things would never be quite the same. And Mona Lisa noticed everything. She had eyes everywhere, sources of information that extended throughout the organization. June began to feel watched constantly, a prickling sensation between her shoulder blades. Her apartment felt less safe, as if someone had been there when she was out, though nothing was obviously disturbed. Small things started going wrong in ways that felt deliberate and calculated. Her mail went missing regularly. Her car had flat tires repeatedly, always in inconvenient places. Her phone received calls from blocked numbers that hung up immediately when she answered, just breathing on the other end. The pressure was subtle but constant, designed to wear her down psychologically, to make her paranoid and afraid. Then June started noticing something else, something her investigative instincts picked up on. Victor Crane and Mona Lisa Sterling. They were careful, professional, distant in public, maintaining proper boundaries. But June caught moments that didn't quite fit the pattern, small inconsistencies that her trained eye noticed. The way Victor's eyes would track Mona Lisa when she entered a room, following her movement with an intensity that went beyond professional interest. The way they were always the last two to leave meetings, finding reasons to linger. The glances that lasted a second too long, carrying meaning that others missed. June's investigative instincts kicked in automatically, the skills she had developed over years of research. She started paying closer attention, documenting patterns mentally, building a picture from fragments. She noticed how they coordinated their schedules in subtle ways, how they took calls at similar moments and stepped out together, how they exchanged glances that carried entire conversations. She spent the next few days watching carefully, documenting patterns, and slowly a picture emerged from the pieces. There was history between Victor and Mona Lisa. Recent history, not just old memories. And if June's instincts were correct, and they usually were, that history was dangerous for everyone involved. She was careful, meticulously so. She didn't access anything she wasn't supposed to see, didn't violate any security protocols, didn't do anything that could be called snooping. She just observed, connected dots, built a picture from publicly available information, but she wasn't careful enough, didn't realize that she herself was being watched. 3 weeks later, June arrived at the office early, before the sun was fully up, to find Alex waiting for her, his expression darker than she had ever seen it. Victor stood beside him, arms crossed, his face an impenetrable mask that revealed nothing. "Sit down," Alex said, his voice sharp as broken glass, cutting through the silence. June's stomach dropped, but she sat, her mind racing through possibilities. Alex slid a thick folder across the desk toward her. "Care to explain this?" She opened it with trembling hands and felt the world tilt beneath her, felt reality shift. Inside were financial records, showing large transfers from Alex's accounts to offshore holdings in her name, millions of dollars moving through complex channels. Security footage showing her accessing restricted files late at night, her face clear in the camera. Anonymous tips claiming she was leaking information to rival organizations, detailed accusations that seemed to know things only an insider would know. All of it was damning, conclusive, devastating. All of it was completely fake. "Alex, I didn't," she started, her voice weak. "Don't." His voice was hard as stone, cold as ice. "I trusted you. I brought you into my world, gave you access to everything, and this is how you repay that trust. This is how you thank me for saving you from poverty." June's mind raced, analyzing the evidence even through her panic. The transfers were falsified. She could see the metadata inconsistencies if she had time to explain them properly. The security footage had been altered. The timestamps didn't match the system logs. The anonymous tips were too detailed, too perfect. The kind of thing someone would create if they were trying too hard. But explaining all of that would take time, would require access to systems and technical analysis. Someone had framed her carefully and thoroughly, and she knew exactly who. "Give me 48 hours, June said, her voice gaining strength, forcing herself to sound confident. "Let me prove that all of this is fake, manufactured. Give me a chance to show you the truth." "Why should I?" Alex asked, his voice cold. "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't end this right now. Because I've never lied to you. Not once since the day we met." June held his gaze, refusing to look away despite the fear. "And if you believe I'm capable of betraying you like this, if you think I would throw away everything for money, then you never really knew me at all. You never understood who I am." They stared at each other across the desk, the tension thick enough to cut. June could see the war happening behind his eyes, could see trust battling against doubt, instinct fighting against evidence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded once, sharply. 48 hours. "But if you run, if you disappear, I will find you. And you won't like what happens when I do." June didn't waste a single second. She called Marcus Chen, a colleague from her old job who owed her a favor, who had helped her on projects before. They met at a coffee shop far from downtown Salem, in a neighborhood where no one would recognize them. "This is extremely dangerous, June," Marcus said nervously, looking around constantly, his hands shaking slightly. "You're dealing with people who make other people disappear without a trace. I know exactly how dangerous it is, but I don't have a choice. I'm dead either way if I don't prove my innocence." She slid her laptop across the table. "I need you to analyze these files with everything you know. Someone faked all of this very carefully, and I need to prove exactly how they did it. Need to show the seams." They worked through the entire night, fueled by coffee and desperation. Marcus dissected the files with expert precision while June took detailed notes, building a case. The financial transfers had been created using legitimate access codes, but the metadata showed they had been backdated, created after the fact and inserted into the system. The security footage was real, but edited with sophisticated software, frames removed and replaced. The emails were the sloppiest part, sent from burner accounts that had been carelessly registered, leaving digital footprints. Whoever did this was good, very good, had access to serious resources, Marcus said around 3 a.m, his eyes red from staring at screens. But they got overconfident, made small mistakes that an expert can detect. They assumed no one would look this closely. "Can you trace them? Can you find out who did this?" "Already done." He pulled up documents, lines of code and digital trails. The financial transfers were initiated using access codes registered to Victor Crane. The security footage was edited on a computer registered to a shell company owned by Mona Lisa Sterling. And the burner phone used for the anonymous tips was purchased using a credit card linked to Victor Crane. June felt ice water pour through her veins, felt her suspicions confirmed. Victor and Mona Lisa, working together, plotting together. They dug deeper, Marcus using tools and techniques that June didn't fully understand, finding encrypted communications between Mona Lisa and Victor going back 2 years. Conversations about patience, about timing, about waiting for the perfect moment. Plans for seizing control of Alex's operations. detailed strategies that showed months of planning. Strategies for eliminating obstacles, for removing people who got in their way, for disappearing with millions of dollars, and references to their past, to a relationship that had ended badly years ago, before Mona Lisa met Alex, to feelings that had never really died, that had been buried but not extinguished, to a reunion that had happened in secret, rekindling something that should have stayed dead. They had been planning this for years, carefully and patiently, setting up the pieces on the board, moving them gradually into position, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And June had become a problem because Alex trusted her, because she had gotten too close, because she might notice inconsistencies. She had become someone who could ruin their carefully laid plans. So Mona Lisa and Victor decided to eliminate her before she could become a real threat. June compiled everything into a single encrypted file, organized and documented, and brought it to Alex 36 hours after he had given her the deadline. She walked into his office and set the evidence on his desk with steady hands. "Read it," she said simply. "All of it. And then decide." Alex picked up the file, his expression skeptical and tired. But as he read, June watched his face transform, watched the progression of emotions, shock at the scope of the betrayal, anger at being deceived, betrayal cutting deep, and underneath it all, a bone-deep weariness that came from years of living this life. When he finished, he looked up, and June saw something broken in his eyes. Mona Lisa and Victor, together. They've been planning this for a very long time. I was just the catalyst, the thing that made them accelerate their timeline. When you started trusting me, bringing me into important meetings, they panicked. They thought if they could turn you against me, they could proceed without interference, without anyone noticing the inconsistencies. Alex stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city he controlled, at the empire he had built. For a long time he said nothing, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, his shoulders tense. "I should have seen it," he finally said, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. "All the signs were there, right in front of me. I was blind because I didn't want to see." "What are you going to do?" June asked quietly. He turned to face her, and June saw something new in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before, determination mixed with resignation. "I'm going to let them think they won. I'm going to give them enough rope to hang themselves." The next 2 weeks were the hardest of June's life, a constant performance that drained her. She and Alex maintained the fiction that their relationship had been destroyed, that she had been exposed and cast out. June moved to a different apartment across town, made a show of looking for other work, acted like a woman who had been humiliated and defeated. She played the role perfectly, letting people see her desperation. Meanwhile, Alex pretended to believe Mona Lisa's lies, to accept her explanations. He was distant with Victor, but not suspicious, not accusatory. He played the part of a man who had been betrayed by someone he trusted, someone who was hurt and withdrawn. It was a masterful performance, convincing everyone around him. Mona Lisa and Victor grew careless, confident in their victory. They started making mistakes, leaving trails, getting sloppy. And through it all, June and Alex worked together in secret, meeting in safe houses, communicating through encrypted channels, building a case that would destroy Mona Lisa and Victor completely and irrevocably. But something else was happening too, something neither of them had planned or expected. The forced proximity, the shared purpose, the knowledge that they were the only two people who understood what was really happening, created a bond that went beyond professional, beyond simple alliance. It was something deeper, more fundamental. When Alex looked at her now, June saw something that made her heart race, that made her feel things she hadn't felt in years. And she knew he saw the same thing reflected in her eyes. One night in a safe house in Portland, in a small apartment that smelled of dust and disuse, Alex finally broke, the walls finally coming down. "If this goes wrong," he started, his voice rough with emotion he was trying to control. "It won't," June said firmly. "But if it does, if they realize what we're doing, they'll come for you first. They'll hurt you to get to me." He moved closer, his face intense. "You could still walk away, disappear, start over somewhere far from here." June moved closer, closing the distance between them. "I know the risks. I've known them from the beginning. I chose to stay anyway, knowing everything. Why? The question was raw, vulnerable, stripped of all pretense. You could have run. You could have taken the evidence and gone to the police, made a deal. Why would you risk everything for someone like me? Someone with blood on his hands? Because you're not the monster everyone thinks you are, June said, her voice soft but certain. Because underneath all this, underneath the power and the violence, you're just someone trying to survive in a world you never really wanted, a world you were born into. Because I see who you really are, and that person is worth saving. Alex reached out and touched her face, his fingers gentle, trembling slightly. You see too much. You see things I've spent years hiding. Maybe that's exactly what you need. Someone who sees the truth. He kissed her then, and it felt like falling and flying at the same time, like dying and being reborn. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Alex's expression was serious, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. When this is over, he started. When this is over, we'll figure it out. June finished, her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. But first, we have to finish this. We have to end it. The trap was set with meticulous care, every detail planned. Alex had been quietly compiling evidence against Mona Lisa and Victor for weeks, working late into the night. Not just their plot against him, but everything. Financial crimes going back years, weapons trafficking routes, names of corrupt officials on their payroll, offshore accounts holding millions in dirty money. He had everything, documented and verified. And instead of handling it himself, instead of making them disappear the way his world normally operated, instead of using violence, Alex did something that surprised everyone. He gave it all to the federal authorities, walked into an FBI office with his lawyer, and made a deal. Immunity for his testimony, protection for June, and a chance to start over. When Mona Lisa and Victor tried to execute their final move, stealing a massive shipment that would have given them the capital to disappear forever, they walked straight into a coordinated federal operation. FBI, ATF, state police, everyone waiting. The arrests happened at dawn, a dozen agents moving in simultaneously. June watched the news coverage from a safe location, seeing Mona Lisa's face as she was led away in handcuffs, her perfect hair disheveled, her makeup smeared. The woman who had terrorized so many people looked small and defeated, diminished. Victor didn't even resist, just went quietly, his face expressionless. It was over. Finally, irrevocably over. With Mona Lisa and Victor gone, their entire operation collapsed like a house of cards. The evidence led to dozens of additional arrests, unraveling a network that had operated for years. The entire rotten structure came crashing down, and Salem began to change. And Alex used the chaos to disappear, to dismantle his own empire piece by piece. Legitimate businesses were sold to honest buyers. Illegal operations were shut down permanently. Bank accounts were emptied and the money distributed, some to charity, some to people his organization had hurt over the years. It was methodical, complete. A systematic destruction of everything he had built. When it was finished, Alex Kane ceased to exist in the underworld that had defined him for so long. June found him 2 months later in a small apartment in Bend, Oregon, a quiet town far from Salem. He answered the door looking different, transformed. Simpler clothes, less polished, more real. His hair was longer, his face more relaxed. "You came," he said, as if he had been waiting but hadn't been certain. "Of course I came. Did you really think I wouldn't?" She stepped inside the modest apartment, so different from his office in Salem. "Is this really what you want? To just disappear? To become someone else? I want to find out who I am when I'm not playing the role everyone expects," Alex said, closing the door. "I want to see if I can build something that isn't based on fear and violence, something clean and honest. I want to see if redemption is actually possible. And you want to do that alone?" Alex moved closer, his eyes searching hers. "That depends entirely on you, on whether you can see a future with someone like me. With everything I've done." June thought about everything they had been through, all the danger and fear and moments of connection. She thought about the woman she had been when she first walked into the Crimson Pearl, desperate and invisible, and she thought about the woman she had become, someone stronger, braver, capable of facing anything. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "We're in this together, whatever comes next." Alex smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she had known him. It transformed his face, made him look years younger. They stood in that small apartment in Bend, Oregon. Two people who had survived a war they never asked to fight, and they began the slow, careful process of building something new. Something clean. Something honest. Something that belonged only to them. June had learned the hardest lesson of all, that the most dangerous people aren't the ones who threaten you openly with violence. They're the ones who smile while planning your downfall in secret, who use trust as a weapon, who destroy you from within. But she had also learned something more important. That courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about choosing to stand up anyway, even when every instinct screamed to run. That intelligence and determination could be more powerful than violence, and that sometimes the most broken people could heal each other if they were willing to try, if they were willing to be vulnerable. Somewhere in a federal prison, Mona Lisa Sterling sat in a cell and thought about the waitress who had refused to break, who had stood up when everyone else cowered. She thought about the moment she had thrown that wine glass, expecting fear and seeing only calm determination. That had been her first mistake, underestimating June Holloway. It had also been her last. And in Bend, Oregon, in a small apartment far from the world they had escaped, Alex and June sat together in comfortable silence, building a life that belonged to no one but themselves. A life based not on power or fear, but on the simple, radical act of choosing each other every single day. The war was over. They had won, not with violence or revenge, but with truth and courage. And now, finally, they could breathe, they could live, they could be free. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony with no guests, just the two of them and a justice of the peace. June took his new name, became someone different. Alex started a legitimate consulting business, using his knowledge of logistics and operations to help honest companies. June returned to research, working remotely for organizations that exposed corruption. They built something real, something that mattered. And when June discovered she was pregnant a year later, they both cried tears of joy, knowing they could give their child something neither of them had ever had, a safe, honest life filled with love. Their daughter was born on a spring morning, and they named her Hope, because that's what she represented. Hope for a better future, hope that the past didn't define who you were, hope that redemption was possible. And as Alex held his daughter for the first time, looking down at her tiny face, he made a silent promise. She would never know the world he came from. She would grow up knowing only love and safety and truth. The past was behind them, finally at peace. The future stretched ahead, bright and full of possibilities, and the present was exactly where they should be, together, free, home.